Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
And welcome back, everyone, to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute, a podcast that celebrates the films of Gene Wilder 1 minute at a time. And for season 2, we are diving into Blazing Saddles, one Laurel and Hardy welcome at a time. I'm your host, I'm Alan Sanders.
I am your co-host, Walt Murray.
And it is our pleasure to welcome for the very first time to The Wilder Ride, Father David Mowry. Father Mowry, welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you here. I first heard you on a few episodes of the Indiana Jones Minute. I think during Last Crusade, they were dealing with a lot of biblical themes and they needed to bring in an expert. And so we are going to be dealing with these next couple of minutes with a reverend who's trying to bring peace and calm to the town. So I thought, hey, why not leverage that same body of knowledge that you brought to the Indiana Jones Minute?
Well, I appreciate you thinking of me. There's not as many connections with medieval monks here in the Wild West, but we'll see what we can make happen here.
I don't know. Reverend Johnson looks like he's kind of been preserved for a while. So,
well, and do you feel like you get called in to bring peace and serenity to the Minute by Minute podcast?
Well, I've only served as the chaplain for the Movies by Minutes community for a little while now, and there hasn't been any rancor. You expect maybe a little something, maybe possibly between the Star Wars Minute folks and the Star Trek Minute folks, but everyone's very friendly. Everyone's busy collaborating. Maybe had a few calls about exercising some podcast mics or to just work through some personal issues, maybe some hurt feelings from what someone said on a certain episode, and just kind of helping people consider a different point of view. But nothing overly taxing yet.
See, I was under the impression that I might need the anointing of the sick, but then I realized it's only if you're physically ill, not for my state of mind.
Yeah, we have, for your spiritual needs, I got you covered. For your mental needs, there are other experts for that. When we get off mic, I have a Rolodex that I can run through and make some recommendations for you.
Awesome. Well, Father, every single time we bring in a guest for the very first time, especially the first minute, we always like to take a moment to just sort of recap with that guest their experiences with Blazing Saddles. So, why don't you give us a kind of a breakdown? Where do you fall in terms of your history with Blazing Saddles?
Blazing Saddles is a movie I've seen several times. It continues to be one of my favorite comedies. It's number 2 behind Young Frankenstein, honestly. And of all things, it was my parents that introduced this movie to me and my brother. Now, we had to be a certain age, of course, and we had the Blockbuster video version of the film, I think, when we rented it. So it had undergone some light editing. And there were also, I think my mother made use of the fast forward button a few times while we were watching it.
A very wise lady. But
it was something that was very much a part of my parents' college years, and immediately after they had graduated from college in the early 80s, and so they had seen this movie when it first came out and stuck with them, and was something they wanted to hand on to their kids. And boy, I just about wet myself watching this movie several times. It is absolutely ridiculous what happens in this film. And all of the social commentary I've only grown to appreciate over the years. When I watched it as a kid, it was just a goofy movie. But now, as an adult, I go back and I appreciate the comedy on a whole new level because of all the jokes it makes at the expense of racism, at the expense of all these systemic problems in society.
That's perfect bridge to the question I was going to ask next, and you've already started to answer it, was, did you understand the underlying meaning of the satire of this film? Because one of the reasons Walt and I chose to do this as our second installment for The Wilder Ride was we live in a culture right now that is so easily triggered by a word without understanding why that word might be used for a greater or bigger intention.
I had a vague understanding of it. I think my parents had explained just how racist things were in the past, and of course I had a good solid 1990s American education, and so I was introduced to the idea that racism is bad and we need to treat people who look differently from us as we would treat anybody else. All good messages to have. So I got the sense that, what these people are doing in the town, this isn't fair to the sheriff. I also remember my parents being very clear about being careful in what I said to other people. I remember my mother talking about, even using seemingly innocent words around people of different ethnicities and nationalities and races, and how those could be potentially racist. As I mentioned, for the version of this movie that we saw, I think the N-word was censored in the videotape version that we saw. So that wasn't something that my parents had to worry as much about. But just the hint of it, like we get behind the church bell in this minute, was enough for my, gosh, how old was I? Maybe it was 10 or 11 years old for me to giggle because, he's saying a naughty word, but he isn't, we are hearing it because of the bells. That's funny.
Well, what about in today's climate now, as far as looking at it today, as we are analyzing this movie in the movies by minutes format, breaking it down a minute at a time? What are your thoughts about the need for, I don't want to lead the question, but the need for a modern audience to understand why satire has to do what it's doing here? Like, you could not, if you censor it down too much, I think you water down the message.
The power of satire is the ability to critique something in a misdirected way. If you try to attack something head on, you come off as too pharisaical, as too serious, and you become painted as a crank, someone who just has an axe to grind and someone who can be ignored for having very strident views on something. If you make it funny, though, and you get people to laugh, you sneak that criticism in through the back door. And so for a movie like Blazing Saddles, made at the time it was, provides a satire of racism to show up the systemic problems in society contemporary to the movie by pulling on an era that's in the distant past, at least for our audiences today and at the time the movie was made. Yeah, you couldn't make Blazing Saddles today, but that doesn't mean you can't do something intelligent in terms of satire. I mean, instead of Blazing Saddles, now we get movies like Get Out, which speak to the same systemic issues, but make use of different movie tropes and setups and scenarios using the tropes of the thriller or the horror movie rather than those of the Western and the comedy in order to show up the absurdities underneath, things like racism and the systemic abuses that support it.
Walt, I'm already getting a sense that we are not going to talk a whole lot in this episode.
I just turned the hockey game on.
Well, no, I fear we're both going to do that to make sure that we don't call out just how unprepared we are compared to our guest.
Well,
he's so good.
I talk for a living, gentlemen. I don't know what you were expecting. I talk about serious stuff all the time. It's what we're recording on Sunday. This is what I was doing all morning, was talking about serious stuff. And I'm still, I guess, a little bit in preaching mode because I'm just used to talking and no one else responding back. I apologize.
No.
Professional hazard.
You know what? Walt and I get to be on every single episode. So when we get a guest that can just run and then starts using, when you start bringing up the Pharisees my goodness. Yeah, we're going to kick back, let you just have the stage.
Well, and I think it's interesting, too, because you and I have talked over Facebook a couple times, and we have a lot in common, but we also, I'm from a historically Protestant Southern background. Mm-hmm. You're from a Midwestern Catholic background. Mm-hmm. I grew up, I'm a good bit older than you, and so I grew up seeing, in the South particularly, more racism and things like that. Sure. But it's interesting to hear what you have to say about comedy in it. And there was a video going around this week on Facebook and Twitter, an old Johnny Carson clip where somebody had asked him why he doesn't get political on his show. And he was kind of interesting. He said, yeah, no, I don't. I intentionally don't. But then he said, but I do slip some things in through comedy, but it's not really why I'm there. I'm trying to make people laugh, and I'm trying to be humorous, and I really don't want people to know what direction I'm coming from. And I think that is one interesting thing about comedy, is that you are able to get people to drop their defenses a little bit so that you can sneak that cultural commentary in there as you need to. And unfortunately, I think that we're in a time where if we're not careful, we're going to lose our comedic prophets because they're going to be silenced. And I think that's a very dangerous thing.
I don't know if I entirely agree with that. You look at the success of people like Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart and John Oliver and Samantha Bee. These are professional comedians. They make jokes for a living, but they're making jokes at the expense of the established status quo and authority figures and people in positions of power. And so many people are getting their news. They're getting their sources of information from comedians, because they think these people who are able to poke fun and to provide satire provide a clearer lens on what's going on in the world than professional, non-comedic news sources. So there's a difference, though, I think, between something that, say, Samantha Bee would do than Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks is doing a satire as a work of art. He's setting up a whole story and movie in order to talk about some issues and yet get you to laugh along the way. Samantha Bee and comedians like her seem to be doing more mockery, just kind of directly naming the absurdities rather than pulling off the trick of satire. So comedy continues to be used today, and I don't think we're in any danger of comedic satire of political and social issues going away anytime soon.
Well, let's hope not, because Mel Brooks actually did put out an article not that long ago. It was ironic with, I guess, probably with the 45th anniversary of Blazing Saddles that we just passed, and a lot of people looking back, that's he said that hyper political correctness can be the end of comedy if we aren't careful.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I think wry and ribald commentary is certainly alive and well. I worry about the art medium of the comedy or the comedic storytelling of being able to carry an audience for an hour through social commentary rather than the short little bits we see on TV. And unfortunately, I think part of our current culture is we have a very short attention span.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Yeah, and I think one thing that Brooks and his crew did in a masterful way here is that they created a comedy trope of a bad guy. And a guy who a few guys that you really hate.
That's Headley.
That's Headley. And those guys use the language that we disapprove of and view people as inferior, and just because of the color of their skin. And so you really hate those guys, and you hate them even more because of that. And if they weren't able to use that language, they never would have been able to create that character to its full extent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me argue this too as well, Walt, as we've been going through here. Headley, I don't think, ever says, we'll have to watch for the rest of the movie, it's everyone around him who uses the epithets. He's actually far more diabolical and speaks far more civilized. And I think that's actually another area of Mel Brooks sort of playing fun to, here's the polished politician who will smile to your face, but, beware, what's it Shakespeare said, beware, there are daggers in men's smiles.
Mm-hmm.
The townspeople use some of the same epithets, but they slowly realize the stupidity thanks to Sheriff Bart winning them over. So the use of language doesn't necessarily always just happen on the bad guy side. Sometimes it's the townspeople in between that just, quote unquote, didn't know any better. But now that Sheriff Bart's there over the course of the movie, they're all brought into some enlightenment, which is why we have Father Mowry here.
Well, I don't know about that. I'm here to help the light along. I would certainly not put myself forward as a source of enlightenment against my programming to impersonate a deity.
Okay.
All right. Well, that was what we needed. So
well, I guess so.
We're done.
Maybe you can look through that Rolodex. You don't have any lesser gods on speed dial? Anybody?
Let's see. I think Ball is free these days.
All right, well, let's go ahead then and dive into the minute here itself. We are midway through the week. It's Wednesday, hump day, Igor's favorite day of the week. And we are continuing where we left off yesterday, where Sheriff Bart is making his entry to the town. He's on his way. We've got Gabby Johnson up on one of the rooftops trying to figure out where he's coming and if he's coming. And you got everybody out there getting ready to receive the sheriff when he does arrive. So let's go ahead and set the table. This minute actually does start off right with Gabby on the roof pointing his telescope, and it's going to end with the welcome sign suddenly rolling up. So let's dive into this, guys. First thing first, Walt, I have to fix what I was saying earlier this week. I now know where Gabby Johnson is, and he is exactly positioned where he needs to be to see the sheriff. I was talking about it looked weird that he was posed, but when we get a long shot here a few seconds in, we're going to see that as the sheriff cuts the corner, and we're going to jump around a little bit in this minute, but as he cuts the corner, we see Gabby Johnson on the roof line just over the sheriff, and he actually is looking still through his telescope down on Sheriff Bart.
Yeah.
Oh, sure enough, there he is.
Yep.
And I had, until we did this minute by minute, had never realized where Gabby Johnson was.
Yeah, so wait, okay, I see him now. Okay, I got you. So he's down at the end of the street.
Yeah, and he's falling in with a telescope.
Yeah.
I got you. Yeah, that's right.
And remember when I said it looked like he was staring at the side of a building? Well, there's the building, but obviously it's set back just a little bit from where his perch is on the roof. And since the sheriff is going to be coming in and making that 90-degree turn to come down Main Street, Gabby Johnson is exactly where he needs to be. So I was wrong. Mark the tape and send it to my wife.
All right, please hold up a picture of today's newspaper as you say that, Alan.
Proof of life here. I'm still here.
Mm-hmm.
So basically what we can take from that is episode 27 will be deleted from the Wilder Ride.
No, I will.
Be a Patreon exclusive.
No problem. A Patreon. Step right up, ladies and gentlemen. Here, Alan, make a mistake. It's rare. It's not happening very often, but when it does, boy, do we capitalize.
I love Gabby's physicality while he's up there on the roof. He really sells the frustration. The authentic frontier gibberish isn't enough. We get the whole arms and shoulders going. He's hopping up and down. He is communicating. Come, flabbered, subnarded.
Well, and the funny thing is, in any other place, this guy would be the town lunatic. For him, they've now let him speak at a town hall meeting, I guess.
Well, church service.
And or a church service. Yeah, that's right. And he's now the lookout for the town.
Well, he's the best man for the job, obviously.
Oh, he really is.
He can be heard over a long distance. He has excellent pronunciation and diction.
Yeah.
Well, as we've been going through this, we've also been noting how many times we hear a line duplicated. Either a person says it twice, or we hear it twice, or it's echoed. We're going to get this right off the bat with Gabby Johnson, because he tries to say the sheriff is and the bong hits. And of course, they mishear him, and they think he says the sheriff is near.
Hey, the sheriff is a near. What are you saying? The sheriff is near. No, God blame it, dang blame it. The sheriff is a near.
So he gets all upset, as Father Mowry said, turning into Yosemite Sam up there, stamping and hollering. And he's like, and I had to go through this about 15 times. I believe the exact line is, no dang gall blang a dang a blam it. I said the sheriff is, and because he took so much time with all the gall dang blang a dang a bang it, he gets another bong to interrupt the word one more time.
And absolutely perfect timing.
So he repeats himself twice, and we're going to get Higgins in a second. For his second time, we already heard him go through the speech earlier this week practicing.
Oh, wow.
He's going to give it again. So another repetition throughout this comedy, Father. We found so many echoes of the exact same line multiple times.
Now, did Mel Brooks write the script for Blazing Saddles?
There were actually 5 people credited with writing the script. Andrew Bergman actually came up with the initial first script, and he called it Tex X. And when it was approached to Mel Brooks, he told one of the producers saying, I don't really do other people's work. Now, he said in some of his behind the scenes, he hadn't really been paid recently and was sort of scrounging around. And the guy goes, well, we'll give you $100,000. He's like, you know what? I think I could do somebody else's script. But they decided to get in the writing room. And one of the first things he did is he brought Richard Pryor in. He said he knew he needed to have a black voice. And who better than the rising comedic star of Richard Pryor at the time? Brought him in and brought 2 other writers in. So there were 5 total individuals that actually crafted the script that we now have as Blazing Saddles.
Well, the double up must have been a very favored tactic in the writer's room if it's sprinkled throughout the script like this. I'm just wondering if there's one particular person whose influence is behind that.
I don't know, Walt. I don't think we've actually been able to pin who wrote which lines. We do know Richard Pryor was solely responsible for the creation of Mongo and all of the Mongo scenes. That's been talked about in many of the behind the scenes and commentary.
Nice.
And we do know he authorized every use of the N-word. Every time Mel Brooks said, do we say it here or do we not? It always went to Richard Pryor.
Well, a lot of the other writing, from what I've seen and read, is that was done kind of argumentatively, that somebody would have an idea and they'd almost fight it out in the writer's room to determine what was going to be said.
Could it be any other way when Mel Brooks is involved?
No. Utter bedlam.
No.
Utter and complete bedlam. And but one of the things I was thinking about this movie, and a theory on the repetition for me, is that I think they knew that they were kind of machine gunning us with jokes at times. And it's almost like they give us an opportunity to hear it a second time so that we can digest it fully.
I think I agree with that.
That's
I hadn't
fair.
really, fleshed it out enough in my head. And I bring it up again because I noticed reviewing these minutes, I'm like, he says it twice. Higgins is getting ready to say his Laurel and Hardy twice. We get this constant. And I think you're right. I think these jokes come so fast and so quickly. It's double. Hey, I used the same word
There
twice.
you go, Mel
Edith
Brooks.
the
Thanks.
The infection is spread. Oh, no.
These jokes come so fast. I mean, they come so fast.
The jokes seem to
fast
come
are they?
fast.
They do. You're right. I do believe maybe the technique is to have that sort of echoing of the line just in case we may have missed it the first time, so we don't miss what's happening.
Well, and it was at a time when, and we've said this before, you couldn't go home and watch it on video. You couldn't rewind. It was just in the theaters, then it was gone, and you had to wait until hopefully it got re-released. So that really would be a good technique for them. I think the other thing that works with it, though, is that the repetition sometimes is funnier than just the one-line joke.
Oh, absolutely. To this day, my brother and I still crack each other up quoting Gabby's line here. I mean, with the bell toll in the background. In fact, when I was talking to him the other day, mentioning that I was going to be on the show, this was the first thing he said. Oh, the sheriff is a Nippon. And it's been at least 15 years since we've seen this movie in the same room at the same time. But this joke is the one that we took with us. It's the one thing that we have continued to quote to each other over the years. And I think the repetition helped cement it in our brains.
I think you're right as well. We're going to have someone joining us several weeks from now who was a morning co-host with me on a radio show for a while. And we shared this. We both learned this was one of our favorite movies as well, having not known each other until she came to work at the radio. And every time we had to interview our local sheriff, we both would look out the window and spontaneously say, hey, the sheriff is near. And it's just something we always said because we just would always quote this movie.
Well, and it is funny because that line, you can almost use that line to kind of ping and find the other Blazing Saddles fans. Because if you say
it's
that
the deck
line,
officer of Blazing Saddles.
it is. And it's like other people immediately go, oh, yeah, Blazing Saddles. And like they're in with you. Mm-hmm. So it's a great line for that. And of course, it fits Gabby perfectly because you can't understand him. And then you all of a sudden have the bell over the top of it, really making sure you can't understand him.
Yeah, I think in a way, it might be the funniest use of the N-word in the movie.
I agree.
Oh, I think so.
Because you don't hear it. It's playing with those expectations, and it's showing up. These townspeople are expecting something, and we're going to see their true colors, in a certain sense.
Well, and it's funny because probably 3 minutes ago they were in the governor's office, and he said, "Come here, don't you realize that this man is a neh?" And then he turns around and he goes, "Wait, come with me. Don't you realize this man is a neh?" And so you have him. You have that now 4 times where the N word has gotten cut off, and number one, I think it's just hilarious. But number two, I think it's great that they don't end up using the word.
Well, they don't need to. You know exactly what they're going to say.
It's like my creative bleeping in the episodes.
Just like.
That's right.
It works. All right. Well, let's get about 30 seconds into this. The band is all struck up. The Bart's getting closer down Main Street. And as everything starts to...
I love Bart's smile as we see him in the telescope.
Oh, yeah.
Get this big old grin as he's approaching the town.
He is super stoked for this job. Well, I mean, he dodged the hangman's noose, and he's about to be the sheriff of Rockridge. That's a field promotion.
Boy, that's a
Absolutely.
big promotion. And I think he feels like he's going to be welcomed into the town as well.
Well, he's hearing the band play, the church bells ringing, he hears all the cheers.
Yeah, and he's, I don't know if it's naivete or whatever. And he even comes in riding proud and, looking around with a very, kind of victorious smile at first.
Yeah. I don't know. Naive is the word I would use to describe Bart. Bart always struck me as a Bugs Bunny type of guy. He knows exactly what's happening, but he's going to make the most of it and make everyone else around him look like a nincompoop.
That's a good point.
No, I would agree. I agree with the father on this one. Walt, you're wrong.
I'm going to hold my ground. Here I stand. I will die on this hill.
Because he keeps up the smile as Bart knows how to read a room. He can see all these people are absolutely gobsmacked as he's coming down the street. But he knows that the law is on his side.
Yeah. What I was going to say is, as we get to those looks, the band, I mean, to me, it's still a funny, audible. It's like there's so many layers of kind of jokes they're throwing here. And you've got these, guys that had just escaped from the Music Man. And you hear that one lone last note. And it's like dead silent. And you only hear the clops of the horse riding through town. And you want to talk about a hot desert suddenly turning ice cold? Right then.
Yeah. Well, and the only reason I would say that he may be naive is I know I'm not supposed to do this, but I watched ahead a little bit. and there,
what's coming later?
I didn't watch the whole thing. I didn't watch the end credits.
That's no fair.
But there will be a scene coming up where somebody says something to him, and it really kind of cuts his legs out from under him because he was expecting to be accepted.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Maybe it's not okay. I don't know if I want to go naive, but maybe allowed himself to be more positive about his expectations than what actually the town was ready to give him.
Kind of overly optimistic, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll go with that.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair.
I think right now, and when you hear cheering, you hear a band striking up, you hear all these folks you see the big giant welcome sign at the end of the street. They're all waiting for you.
Flag strung up like it's 4th of July.
Yeah. I think you would walk in thinking, oh, wow, look how accepting. And then all of a sudden, I think the father is right. When all of a sudden, when the horn goes, meow, and everybody is quiet, he's like, keep up the smile. I better just keep up the smile.
Well,
almost there. Just keep smiling.
And not to read too much into Bart's character, but I think he's kind of the glass is half full kind of guy most of the time anyway.
Oh, yeah.
And so I could see that he's coming in and he's like, boy, they're excited to have me.
They are so dumb.
Exactly.
Camera wise, I'm going to tell every now and then, because of my background, I like to point some of these things out. I love the fact that they did a sort of version of a Steadicam looking at some of the looks of the people along the side. It's a POV shot from the sheriff because they're all sitting there staring wide-eyed, but there's just enough shake that makes you almost believe that you're watching it from on horseback.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a neat little effect because obviously the camera it'd be too low to be on horse, but because it sort of has just a little bit of shake as it's moving, you get the sense that it is directly from Bart's POV.
The other thing I love that we see in terms of the background is you start to get a sense of the the family connections in this town, because you got a sign for Johnson Flour and Feed on Main Street, and you got Johnson's, I can't tell what, is it a general store there in the very back that Gabby's on the roof of? And then in that panning shot from our gobsmacked townsfolk, there's the Luella Johnson's boutique there.
Yep, everybody. It's the whole town is full of nothing but Johnsons. Big Johnsons, all of them.
See, Father Dave, I warned you, and this is why I've asked you to pray for our podcast.
Oh, this kind can only be driven out by fasting and prayer, so I'll get right on it.
I was going to say you're looking at the wrong guy on the fasting part. But.
Well, thank God Lent is just around the corner from when we're recording this. Walt, I've got 40 days and 40 nights of giving up everything I love, so I won't be able to talk to you.
Real moments of friendship and vulnerability on the Wilder Ride. This is what I came here for.
That's a first and last, Dave. You brought it out in us.
Although, apparently, now talk about a sideways run here. I grew up Catholic, so I have all these rules in my head that somehow either got changed or softened over time. Because I know there are people when I was growing up that are doing time in Hades on a meat wrap for having eaten meat on Fridays, and now we only do that during Lent.
The practice of abstaining from meat on Fridays was connected with the idea of just doing penance on Friday in remembrance of Jesus's death on Good Friday. The bishops of the church maintained the teaching that we should do some form of penance on Friday, and abstaining from meat is a very good penance, but if you don't do that, you should do something else. Now, one could make an argument that so many people had accepted abstaining from meat on Fridays as a lifestyle choice and a cultural expression more than an interior spiritual practice, that when they highlighted the spiritual side of things, it didn't translate as well when they said, well, you don't have to eat meat, and so you don't have to give up meat on Fridays. People heard that as like, oh, well, then I just don't have to do anything. It's not, that wasn't the point. You missed the forest for the trees.
You gotta love humanity, don't you?
Oh boy. What's that? An easier way? I'm there.
I am a buffet style of Catholic. I kind of like this piece and I like this piece, but I'm not taking that piece.
Yeah, well, there's always been those types.
Well, and the reason I bring up the whole meat thing on Friday is because I was only introduced to this about 4 or 5 years ago, because being raised by a good Catholic mom who went to Catholic school herself, she actually hoped that I was going to, as the firstborn son, I was supposed to join the priesthood, much to her chagrin. Shut up, Walt. Shut up. You know, I'm trying to be serious here for our guest, all right? But I found out that during Lent, Sunday is a day off of giving up whatever you gave up. I went, what?
So
when did that happen?
I found out about that when I was in seminary. I had a very observant Irish Catholic mother who taught me how to practice Lent. So when I came home from seminary and said, oh, well, yeah, Sunday, it's a day of feasting because on Sundays we celebrate the resurrection of Christ from the dead on Easter Sunday. And so you can't fast when the bridegroom is here. And my mom looked at me and says, that seminary is turning you into a wimp.
See? Our moms we're two sisters from a different mister. I mean, come on.
But did you take any satisfaction in going, but Mom, I'm a priest. I know these things.
Realize
this is how it works.
Walt, I don't know if you've ever had a Catholic mother in your life, but the one thing you can't say to a Catholic mother is that she is wrong.
No.
No,
especially as it comes to things about Jesus. You can't do that.
Yeah, I had a Presbyterian mom. They're all the same.
There you go. So it's just like that.
Wow. Well, anyway, I don't know where I went with that. So I guess, now I remember. So because we can now go back to feasting on Sundays, even during Lent, I guess we can keep our Sunday recordings.
There you go.
That's right.
Since this is something I love and I don't want to have to give it up.
It's a day of rest after all. And this is renewing and rejuvenating, at least for me anyway. I don't know about you two.
Yeah.
You got to hear each other every time.
You don't have to worry about all the work of like editing, putting it all together.
But you don't do that on Sundays. Oh yeah, you did one earlier today.
Yeah, I did one already.
But the thing for me is I don't laugh this much the rest of the week. So this is a real good way for me to observe the day of rest.
Good.
I like it. All right. Speaking of rest, then, getting back to our movie minute here, just as Higgins here, we've got Howard Johnson giving the speech of a laurel and hearty welcome.
As chairman of the welcoming committee, it is my privilege to extend a laurel and hearty handshake to our new
The punctuation of him calling out the race of our sheriff, followed immediately by the guy who apparently was the only one not paying attention to look up at the last second and slip his chair down on the floor, is hysterical.
Well, and the fact that Howard Johnson basically punched Reverend Johnson with the laurel.
Yes, I saw that too. That was great. I've never seen that before. And the Reverend is a complete professional about it. He leans forward after the motion to make it look totally seamless. Yeah. Like, oh, this is what's supposed to, I'm leaning forward.
You are so right. It hits him, and so he kind of leans, and then he leans more.
And I guess he's just so stunned that he doesn't even notice that he just got hit by the laurel.
Wham.
Hey, did you notice how good Olson Johnson's doing with his facial expression as well when Higgins starts reading? Because he's got his hand up in the air holding his hat. He's got a big grin. And as that hat slowly lowers, it's almost like as it lowers, so does the corners of his mouth.
I don't
He's
think
just
I've ever seen the expression "what the Sam Hill" actually played out on somebody's face until this.
Yes. You look up in the redneck dictionaries, "what the Sam Hill" is going to be a picture of Olson Johnson after he lowers his hat. Wide-eyed, mouth hanging open, just what the?
Deflating into confusion is one of my favorite comedic beats. What?
You know what? Having been involved on movie sets and being an actor and doing these things, if you look at this one shot toward almost the very end, just before the sign's about to go rolling up, everyone has that same just wide-eyed, like you said, Father, gobsmacked, just what the expression, to just having that many extras hold that look for as long. I wonder how many takes they had, because they wanted to giggle. And everyone, when I freeze frame, everyone's got the right look. Not a single one that I can find is breaking.
I think the true MVP award goes to the young lady who's in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, who has frozen with her arm in the air. She's frozen in mid-cheer. And I mean, she made a choice and she's sticking with it. How many takes did she have to hold that arm up? Her shoulder must be killing her.
I have a question as we start to wrap up the minute. When I first saw this movie, and I want to ask you what you thought, did you ever notice that someone actually jerks the sign to make it roll up, or did you just think it rolled up all by itself?
Oh, it doesn't roll up by itself? Wait a minute.
See, I was wanting to catch that too.
You're right. Oh, everything I know is a lie. Oh no, this is terrible.
Leave it to us.
I mean, no, okay, seriously, because now I feel like I'm being mocked.
No, I'd always thought that they had somehow managed to get the sign to roll up on its own, that they had something just below the frame of the shot to
That's what I thought
adjust
too.
to make the spring catch. But no, it's this Yahoo in the gray suit off to the side. Holy cow, look at that.
Just behind the woman wearing the bonnet and the blue pullover, almost like the what do you call that? The shawl. You see he just leans just a little bit, grabs, pulls, and then lets go.
Oh, and you can
and then
just
folds his
see
arms.
the strain on the sign. Oh, look at that.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. They did a good job with it because it wasn't just, hey, get the sign rolled up. He did that, and then he very emphatically crossed his arms and kind of gave a look of disgust.
Oh, that's interesting. So maybe, they could have gone a different direction with that shot and maybe even just done a close-up on him. He's making an intentional character choice because that arm cross is very intentional.
It really is.
Nope. And I did not notice this until just a couple of years ago. I had somehow, for the hundreds of times watching it, and when you think about, because we don't slow things down, but I somehow caught it one time, all of our attention is almost center screen. So we don't look to that little edge to see the man pull the hand. And all of a sudden, when the sign moves, it just looks to us like the sign automatically reacted just like the crowd did.
Yeah.
But you actually do see for just a brief second, there's a bit of a fold on the far edge, and you realize he is the one who has been responsible for hugging it down. The woman in front of him is sort of acting as a shield so we don't see it. And then he pops it and it rolls up on its own.
Oh, wow.
Now, if I were Mel Brooks, and I know obviously it must have worked because I watched this how many times, and I said, like, I didn't pick it up until a couple of years ago, and you guys, you're picking up on it now, but I would have had the guy holding it down before we went to this shot, and then all he had to do was let go. Still, it works pretty well for the effect because the last thing that we have is even the sign wants to roll itself up at the approach of the new sheriff.
Oh, it's a great comedic beat.
Well, and I got to be honest, with all the times I've seen it, I thought it just rolled up on its own. So that's really interesting to see him do that.
Once you see it, though, and I hate doing this to our audience now, once you've seen it, you can never unsee it.
No, but, I mean, that's what we're here for, right? Ruin the movie.
The Wilder Ride, the death of innocence.
And we have our new tagline, ladies and gentlemen.
The Wilder Ride,
Father,
the death of innocence.
for accurately nailing us.
Today's tagline brought to you by Father Mowry. Father Mowry, who really cares?
Sent on behalf of Movie by Minute to straighten us out.
All right. Well, that's where this minute actually comes to an end. So before we wrap things up, I got to ask our guest. You are our guest. We are your host. So are there any other...
Oh, is that how it works?
Yeah. Well, I tried to pull a line from the movie. So are there any other notes you had that we may have glossed over looking at this minute number 28?
Looking. No, we covered it all. I just... Again, I love Bart's confidence in facing this obviously racist town. It's just something that really struck me this time around.
Yeah, I think so. I think when you slow it down, you look at it, just even when you say, he knows that this is all going south very quickly, but he never lets his disposition show it, at least not in the minute we're watching right here. Walt, anything in your minutes or anything in your notes?
No, nothing in my minutes, nothing in my notes. I think we've covered it pretty well.
Excellent. All right, well, before we tease what's coming up tomorrow, Father Mowry, I know you're a guest on a lot of these movies by minutes, but if somebody is interested in friending you maybe online or maybe they've got a podcast, they'd love to invite you to come on, how can they get in touch with you?
You can get in touch with me through Twitter. I am at Father Mowry. That's FRMOWRY. I'm also a member of the Wilder Ride listeners group on Facebook, so you can feel free to chat with me there if you want to continue our conversation about the place of satire and the modern comedic landscape. Be happy to have that as an ongoing conversation.
Excellent. Now, do you do confessions over social media yet?
No confessions over social media. We're still analog in that regard because you got to really do that face to face.
Yeah, that makes it hard, doesn't it?
Well, it makes it much more real. It makes it much more vulnerable.
I have to,
and that way you're not afraid of Facebook using that to sell data to advertisers.
Good, Walt. Where can people learn a little bit more about us?
Two great places to learn more about us. Our website. I'm sorry, I'm losing my mind here. TheWilderRide.com is where you can find everything about us, including links to all our social media. You can find information about Father Dave here and his biography and all of our other guests as well. And it's a great place, too, to find our Facebook page and the links there. The other place to find some information on us is on Patreon, patreon.com/thewilderride. You get some of our other material. We did a couple other movies at the end of last year that were great. And we'd love for you to take a look at that. We also have some opportunities to help us out a little bit. If you like what you're hearing, we would appreciate you considering at least giving $1 a month or some other gift. And there's some things that you can get in return for helping us out.
And come back tomorrow, Thursday. We've got more happening here in the middle of the town square of Rockridge, as we will start out minute number 29 with Bart climbing down off of his horse. And we're going to end the minute with Son, you're on your own. So to find out what's going on tomorrow, you need to come back tomorrow for this, The Wilder Ride.
The sheriff is a...
Bong.
No gall blamming dang a bam it. I said. It's a cross between Yosemite Sam and Foghorn Langhorn. I said, boy.
I guess I should have mentioned all the hats.
Oh, no, we're done. Mayday, bail, everybody quit.
Save it. I have a pretty general sense of your guys' patter.
Then we're going to be a force-safe podcast. That means not that I imagine you'll let anything slip, but Walt and I, we have been on occasion known to let something fly. I will be sure to bleep it creatively for our listening audience. And if there's a rabbit trail we decide to go down, that's perfectly okay. We don't have to stick exactly second per second. In fact, I think that would probably hurt me and Walt if we had to do that.
Well, we want everything to be painless here.
I just don't think that it is physically possible for that to happen.
All right, you guys ready to roll?
Ready.